questions. Questions orales. The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
They say weak men create hard times, and this weak Prime Minister's inflationary deficits gave Canadians the worst standard of living in over 40 years. The Finance Minister promised one of her fiscal guardrails would not be going over her deficit, which is $40 billion. In fact, the PBO said she blew right past it. Simple question, what's the deficit?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what my honourable colleague fails to point out is that Canada is projected to have the fastest growing economy in the G7 next year. He fails to point out that we are creating jobs at a near record pace. He doesn't understand that wages are increasing faster than inflation. His strategy for the economy is to make cuts to the programs that are supporting people, cuts to the programs that are building houses. He's opposing, ironically, the tax cut that would deliver relief to families over the holidays. We're going to focus on growing the economy in a way that works for everyone, not the Conservative approach to cut the supports that families need.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
He could have just said he doesn't know, like he doesn't know where the million people he lost went. And even this number-challenged Prime Minister admits every new dollar of his handouts make his inflationary deficits worse. He says he's going to leave the economy to the bankers, that he doesn't think about monetary policy, and he said budgets balance themselves. It's the same incompetence that made Canadians bank broke, building broke, and belly broke. Canadians want to know how broken the Liberal deficit is. What's the number?
Way to go, Jack!
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
My honourable colleague seems to have a penchant for alliteration and personal insults, but what he lacks is an ability to advance policies that will grow the economy or actually help people in need. Mr. Speaker, at every opportunity, they oppose the investments that are creating jobs in this country. They oppose the investments that are building homes in this country, and they oppose the measures that are going to provide tax cuts to middle-class families, to low-income families, to workers in this country. For once, I wish we could have a debate about the issues instead of stooping to these lows where they throw insults instead of advancing policies that help real people.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Here's a common sense policy that common sense Conservatives will bring in when his constituents fire him after the next election. We're going to axe the tax for good for everyone. And these deficits that this Prime Minister keeps making sent over 2 million Canadians into a food bank in a single month, made 1 in 4 Canadians skip meals, and sent 1 in 5 kids into poverty. But the Finance Minister said all of them are just feeling a vibe session. Look, if she's not going to release her economic statement, will she at least tell Canadians how bad she's going to blow through her deficit?
Yeah, way to go, Jack!
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
I'd like to remind that member that the last time that Conservatives were in government, more than 16% of kids were living in poverty, over 1 million children. Since we've come into government, Mr. Speaker, we've lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty through measures like the Canada Child Benefit, supporting families each and every month with up to over $700, through the National School Food Program, now in place in 4 provinces across this country, helping to ensure kids have food at school. Not to mention an HST, GST tax break, Mr. Speaker. We're there for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister supported by the Bloc Québécois, this Liberal government is so bad that it's ashamed of its own results. In the last budget, the Minister of Finance predicted a $40 billion deficit, but now we know that the government has added at least $6 billion in inflationary spending to that forecast. But the Prime Minister is ashamed to reveal what the state of the public coffers is. When will the Prime Minister accept our offer to be transparent with Canadians and present the fall economic statement on Monday? Why are they so afraid of letting Canadians know the truth? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Well, speaking of telling Canadians the truth, Mr. Speaker, when we offered a tax break to Canadians over the holidays, a proposal that a leader of the Conservative Party supported a mere 2 years ago, then what did the leader of the official opposition do? He told his MPs to vote against it, regardless of what they actually wanted. Here in Ottawa today, Conservative members are no longer the representatives of their constituents here in Ottawa. On the contrary, they carry the will of their leader back into their ridings. It's inexcusable. If they really are serious about helping Canadians, they will vote for the tax break. I would invite the honourable member for Port-Neuf, Jacques Cartier, to not take the floor, if not allowed by this chair. The honourable member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, this member ought to be ashamed. The Prime Minister, with the support of the Bloc, keeps spending unaccountably, or without accountability, rather. Meanwhile, families are paying a price for this. According to a Sylvain Charlebois report on food prices, families will have to pay up to $800 more for the groceries in 2025. The Prime Minister thinks that budgets will balance themselves, but he has also said that deficits lead to inflation. He promised to limit the deficit to $40 billion. So will next week's economic statement confirm that he will keep that commitment, or will he cause even more inflation for families? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, my colleague just quoted Sylvain Charlebois on food prices. That same person has said that climate change is the biggest challenge for the agri-food sector. In fact, he just published a report on the impact, the macroeconomic impacts of all this on the agricultural sector. And on page 14, the first part of the report is on climate change. Does it mention the carbon price? No, not at all. That's not even a factor, according to Professor Charlebois. None of this makes any sense. I would just remind the minister to not use documents like this as props. You can quote things, but you can't visibly reference a document.